Hey fans of Magic, this is Nikachu Merfolk Master, and today it is Masters Monday, where we go in depth into a master's minds and understand in detail how they have mastered their archetype, how it interacts with the format, so you get the knowledge to upgrade yourself in that format. If you love learning from Masters of Magic, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Today's special guest is a master of Hogaak. He made second place at Grand Prix Birmingham and followed it up with a first place finish at GP Vegas. But Hogaak has certainly evolved since then to NoGaak. I'd love to thank our special guest today, Simon Nielsen. Thanks for coming onto the show, Simon.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So, you had such a successful run when Hogaak was legal in Modern. Tell us all about why you're such a master with this sort of archetype.
So I think it was like really fortunate for me that it fit my playstyle so well. Because I really enjoy these decks that are like where the decisions are like very intensive and very like condensed into like the first like 3 or 4 turns, and then the game ends. So stuff like Death Shadow, when that was a thing, like that was something I really enjoyed a lot, like the Team of Battle Rage Death Shadow builds, with like Detection Probe and all, or stuff like Hardened Scales is also like similar. The Amulet back with Summer Bloom, like these types of decks where like the game's on that long, but there's just like a lot of really high pressure decisions, and like Hogaak is similar to this. It's also like a creature combo deck, which is also like my sort of jam. So I really just like optimizing like the small decisions that you have to do with like sequencing and like how to line up combat math and all that stuff. That's like really the things I'm good at with Magic. And like if I have to like plan like 3 turns ahead, that's not where I'm good.
Okay. So this suits your style perfectly. Now Hogaak got banned, but as we've seen many times in the past, just because one piece of an archetype gets banned doesn't dismantle the entire deck, because very often the core is still really strong. I mean, we have seen that with Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod died, but like the rest of the core of the deck lived on, evolved over many years in Modern. Same thing with Death Shadow. They lost Gitaxian Probe, and then the deck ended up evolving into an even better deck. Now that we've got NoGaak, how did the deck evolve and still remain competitive even without Hogaak?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of interesting because like except for Merfolk Secret Keeper, which wasn't even in the initial builds of this deck, because that was before Eldraine came out. Except for that card, like the deck has been legal for like quite a while, at least like since they printed Stitcher Supplier. But people just haven't like figured out how to build Vengevine decks like this way that is so all in. People usually think that in order to play Vengevine, we have to play with looting, but that card got banned too.
Yeah.
So what this deck does is that it just ignores like discarding cards from the hand, and just focuses on a bunch of ways to self-mill yourself and a bunch of payoffs, and just accepting that you're gonna have a bunch of dead draws sometimes.
Right. And if you want to know what deck we're talking about, I'll have a link in the description below showing Simon's deck list if you need to be up to date. This deck it's rising up in popularity, but isn't super popular, so you can keep up with the discussion.
Yeah, it's definitely like a new thing. It was back in GP Utrecht, which was like October last year, that Andreas Ganz won a PDQ with this very innovative build of Vengevine. Like, people just assumed that when Fated Looting got banned, Vengevine wouldn't work. But Gans just made it work anyway, won a PDQ, wrote a great article about it. And like from there, like the community has kind of like taken up the deck, the Magic Online community, and like started tuning it. Like Oliver Tomaico was playing it at an SCG at some point where he added the Merfolk Secret Keepers. So the deck is suddenly...
Was Merfolk Secret Keeper key to pushing the deck over the top?
Yeah, so the thing about this deck is that like you do run these creatures that can mill yourself, like Hedron Crab and Stitcher Supplier. But the issue is sometimes that you also need to like hold the creatures in your hand so that you can use them to trigger your Vengevine. And the issue with Stitcher Supplier is that you can't really play turn 1 because then it doesn't help you with Vengevine at all. So what would often happen is that you don't play turn 1, you don't play turn 2 because that's when you play your Glimpse the Unthinkable, targeting yourself. And then on turn 3, like that's when you want to catch the Citrus Flyer. But the great thing about Merfolk Secret Keeper is that you do it turn 1, you mill save for 4, and then you still have the creature to play on a later turn. So that's like the big thing that made I think made the deck a lot better.
So it helps the start of the game, and it also helps your Vengevine plan later on in the game. So it's perfect synergy for the deck. So what are the strengths of this archetype, and in general, what are your good matchups in Modern right now?
So the deck is kind of interesting in that it doesn't. It's not like that it has that many like good or bad matchups. It's more that it depends a lot on like how much sideboard hate is played. So the strengths about this deck is that it's probably the deck that abuses the London Mulligan the most. Actually, the London Mulligan is probably the reason why the deck like can function. Because the thing is that you're just trying to mulligan to a hand that's 2 lands and 2 self-mill effects.
Okay.
And that's all you need. So that could be 4 cards. So you can easily mulligan to 4. And then the beautiful thing here is that then, because of London Mulligan, you get to ship 3 cards to the bottom. So then you keep your hand. It's like 2 lands and Hedron Crab and Citrus Flyer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you ship to the bottom Vengevine, Price Amalgam, Narcomoeba, and then you fetch on turn 1 and shuffle them back into the deck.
Right.
Now I have access to them. And this means that actually, in a lot of hands, you kind of wish that you had mulligan. So like you have your opening 7, you're like, this is a great keep, but I wish I was mulliganing to 5, because then I wouldn't have all these dead cards in my hand. It would be my deck instead, where they're much better. So that's really like the big thing about this deck. It's quite fast. It's like it can kill turn 3, but it's mostly like turn 4, and it just creates this like insurmountable board very quickly. It's quite explosive. Especially like more explosive than previous Vengevine builds, because, well, I mean, except for like, when they had Hogaak, because in addition to Vengevine, you also have like the Narcomoebas and the Price Amalgams, and which means that you just have a bunch of creatures on board very quickly. And since the entire deck is optimized to like mill as many cards as possible, you do get to like see a bunch of these cards very often. It's also, if you like gambling, like it's really good for that, because it's like every time you cast like every time you mill yourself with Secret Keeper or like a Supplier or whatever, then like it's always like a gamble of like, hey, well, how well do I hit with these? And like you cast like you mill so many cards over time that like it's gonna add up to something, but like each individual mill can like range a lot in how powerful it is.
You hear that, Hollow One players? This could be the deck to replace your former slot machine. So yeah. So what are the general weaknesses of this deck? If it doesn't have any good or particularly bad matchups, are you just scared of the sideboard hate?
Yeah, actually, it's mostly the graveyard hate that is a big issue here. So stuff like Leyline and Rest in Peace, or like really big problems, you don't play as well against them as other graveyard decks do. The issue is that this deck is like really a tight machine, so you can't sideboard that many cards. Like I prefer to sideboard like 3 cards and then like 5 card maximum. But then when I'm sideboarding 5 cards, I'm already like destroying like part of the power of the deck. So, so you're really relying on like drawing the right answers at the right time, and also because like your mulligan rules are so strict, it gets a lot harder to like mulliganing to 2 enablers and 2 lands is easy. But when it's 2 enablers, 2 lands, and an answer to Leyline, then that becomes a lot harder to do. So that's the main issue, and I think the deck strength relies a lot on how much Graveyard Hate is played in the format.
But not every deck can play Leyline of the Void and Rest in Peace. What do you think are the most prominent archetypes running these cards?
So for Rest in Peace, like that is a card that has spiked recently in popularity, because back when this deck, like it was really well positioned back in November, for instance, where we had like I think it was a GP in Atlanta, maybe I'm not sure. There was a modern GP at least where like among the top 8 players, in total, what they have of Graveyard Hate was 1 Rest in Peace, 1 Grafdigger's Cage, and 1 Tormod Script among like 8 players. So that was like a really fortunate time for the deck. And then like a couple weeks later, there was a prominent Magic Online modern event, like a modern playoffs, where Gabriel Nassif made top 8 with the deck, and another copy made top 16, and I think I was like top 32. Where like that was a really good weekend for the deck, because everybody was playing these Ursa decks, which don't run that much Graveyard Hate, and they even played like Karn at the time, which meant that they didn't really have space in the sideboard for more than like 1 Tormod Script. For that Karn. So like the Ursa matchups I think are pretty good, because like, you just go so much wide around Oko that you can't really contain it. but there's been like a surge of like other Oko decks, like the banned Snow Control and the banned Stoneblade decks, which then get to play Rest in Peace, and that's an issue for you. It's also like it varies a lot, like between Death Shadow decks. Like some of them choose to play Leyline and some of them don't. So it really like depends on the time where like the Death Shadow decks usually don't play Leyline. Like that makes it a lot better for you. And then there's stuff like Eldrasitron too. That's a deck that could play Leyline and has in the past, but they don't usually do it right now. So yeah, it really is depending on what people are doing. But I think because of the surge in Rest in Peace, because like the Oko decks that are splashing white it does make the deck a little bit worse than it has in the past. I also assume that the new Titan decks, the blue-green Oko Titan decks, like that seems like a really good matchup too, actually, because you don't really care. Like Field of the Dead is not gonna make enough bodies to stabilize.
Wow, it will not make enough bodies versus the NoGaak.
Not on turn 3. Not on turn 3.
Yeah.
Because like this deck goes very wide, and they don't really play Graveyard Hate in the sideboard either. So that's a deck that's like really prominent within the last like few weeks, which might make NoGaak better positioned again.
Right. So let's say there's no Graveyard Hate in the sideboard at all. How do you feel your chances are against Urza variants, Eldrazi Tron, what else is very popular right now? Death Shadow, and
Titan decks, I guess.
Yes, and Titan decks.
And I guess Burn too.
Well, Red Prowess.
Yeah, Red Prowess, for instance. Yeah, so I think the Urza matchups are good, unless they're running like the Stoneblade for Battleskull, which can stabilize against you. But just casting a bunch of cryptic commands doesn't do much. Oko is just like kind of slow. So at every well, it's kind of slow at like dealing with 3 creatures coming every turn, and the Shadow decks I feel like are really good matchups, especially because like the Creeping Chills kind of makes it hard for them to fetch too low, which is their general game plan. Plus you go very wide, and that's usually the best way to defeat Shadow players, because they might have like 2 good blockers, but you have 5 attackers, so you just swarm around them. Then against the Eldrasitron matchup, I feel like that matchup is a little bit close. But the main thing they have here is Chalice of the Void, which I think is quite good if they're on the play, but not good enough if they're on the draw. But even if they're on the play, you can just prioritize stuff like playing Hedron Crab turn 1, and then like the Hedron Crab will just fuel your thing, and you can still cast your creatures for 1 mana and let them be countered.
Merfolk Secret Keeper. You can still cast things like that later.
Merfolk Secret Keeper is a great thing for this one too, because you can also like just mill yourself for 4 on turn 1, and then you play Chalice and you cast Glimpse, and then you still have this creature you can cast, and you don't really care about the O4, you just care about triggering Vengevine. So that's that's some ways you can get around Chalice. I think also the Oko that we have in the sideboard helps a lot against Eldrasitron, because it answers Chalice and it makes their Eldrazi's more manageable.
Okay.
Then against the Titan decks, I haven't played that matchup yet because it's a very recent one. But I mean, I would assume that obviously if they can get a turn 3 Titan and your draw is not super strong, then maybe they can stabilize. At least if they're on the play. But otherwise, I feel like you can pretty easily make a very wide board.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be too scared of those matchups either. They're probably close because it's modern and they can be very explosive.
Right.
That goes with the opponent's deck too, and this deck obviously does have a fail rate because sometimes you just don't hit very well in the top 20 cards in your library. So there's a cap to how good a matchup can be. And for the burn decks, I feel really good against traditional burn because Creeping Chill is very good. It's just super hard for them to raise it. Against the Prowess decks, it's a little tougher because they don't care as much about the life gain. But I think the Prowess decks were quite good against the old Hogaak decks when Hogaak was legal, because the Prowess decks are very good at killing the creatures that you need to convoke to get Hogaak in play. But
with Lava Dart.
Yeah, exactly. Lava Dart and Gotcha even they played back then. But now you don't really rely on having any creatures in play. Because I mean, they kill your supplier. That's just great because you weren't
value
anyway. Yeah, so it's certainly better than it was for Hogaak against Prowess, but it's probably still a closer matchup than it is against Burn. In general, I'm very positive against almost everything if nobody's playing Graveyard Hate.
Right. All right.
That also means I don't need to oversight board.
So why play NoGaak over something like Dredge, which sounds like it has a very similar plan?
Yeah, it really does, and they are kind of similar. The thing about Dredge is that it's a lot slower, and well, it's not like a particularly slow deck, but it's definitely not as explosive,
Mm-hmm.
and you're more vulnerable to stuff like counter spells, for instance, out of the Ursa decks because you're relying on stuff like conflict rate.
Right.
And yeah, it basically just it might also like just be like a thing of taste, I guess, because I'm not sure that like the NoGaak decks are like that much better than Dredge in a vacuum, and like maybe sometimes Dredge is actually better, but they're pretty close. But like I'm certainly someone who would prefer to play a deck like NoGaak because it's because of the slot machine and
Well, it sounds like it's more explosive, and there is some value to getting underneath decks that are trying to stabilize into the long game.
yeah,
And
for
yeah,
sure.
when we talk about like the slot machine aspect, what do you think the fail rate of this deck is? Like, what does it feel like?
Do you mean like what the games look like when it fails, or like how often it fails?
How often it fails? Like, how often you're playing and you just do nothing, absolutely nothing.
It's hard to say. If you are really disciplined and mulligan properly, and I mean, like, if you have a 5 card hand that's like, one enabler and, not quite good enough, to just ship it. Like, you can easily win on 4.
Right. Okay.
Um,
It's probably the most
and
important
sometimes
piece of
even 3,
advice
where
for
you
this
just have to
deck.
hope to top deck the land. So if you mulligan properly, the fail rate is not that high. I don't know, it might be like 5, maybe 10% of games where you don't do anything, and then like there's games where you do a little bit, but it's not quite enough, especially if you're on the draw and they
Mm-hmm.
get to stabilize. And there are games where like you have a good hand, but they thought issue, and then like you just draw poorly. So it's a little bit hard to say because obviously like interaction and like what the opponent does, it's gonna change like what qualifies as a fail rate. But I think like maybe 5% of games where you like do something that's rarely good enough to win. It's probably
So I
that's
know
the
this
thing.
deck isn't incredibly popular. I mean, I've definitely seen it around, so I don't know how much you've seen other people play of it. But what do you think is perhaps the single biggest mistake people make when they're piloting this sort of deck?
Uh, yeah, so I would imagine that the mistake people make, and this deck is, by the way, I usually say that if your deck, like if your deck is hard to play, it just means that it's bad. Because like if a deck is if a deck is worse, you need to like play it better in order to make up for it. And I think that like definitely shows with this deck because compared to the Hogaak decks, like
Hmm.
maybe sure it's like kind of similar in like how difficult it is to get the exact options right. But with Hogaak, you could like mess up a lot and you still win because the deck was
Hmm.
like very busted.
Here's this
This
eight
deck is
eight
not like that.
trampler.
And if you mess up, like you could just get super punished. And I've lost games because I used my creeping chill when I wasn't supposed to. That meant I didn't have enough cards to delve for my Gurmag Angler.
Okay.
I've lost games like definitely because like, one of the most common ones would be like to play Stitcher Supply turn 1. Like sometimes it's correct if you have enough other creatures in hand, but often it's not correct and you're just supposed to like wait. There's also the whole thing of
Okay.
like yeah when to like how to fetch, how to sequence your lands to make sure to like enable your Hedron Crab the most. Yeah, there's also the thing where like sometimes need to be aware of like hard casting Vengevine. You only have 2, maybe 3. I have 3 in my version of lands to fetch with Vengevine
Hmm.
or to cast Vengevine. But since you're milling yourself so much, you might end up milling some of these lands. So sometimes you need to go get them early, but that might mean it takes too much damage, or that you leave yourself without enough blue sources. So if you draw a Secret Keeper, you can't mill and cast it at the same turn. So it's pretty tough to to think about those things. And I think like really practice makes perfect, and just like try and envision like how you are getting your Vengevines into play once you mill them. Like make sure you have like outs to do that.
Hmm. So from like basically turn one, you're always in general trying to play for that Vengevine turn because it's very
Yeah.
interesting. It's not intuitive to hold back the Stitcher Supplier on turn one.
Yeah, it really isn't. Where you just like you just play fetch land go and don't do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes if you have like a particularly poor draw, like sometimes it might even be correct to wait like another turn and not do anything turn 2 in order to like set up properly. for later turn. But it all depends on like how easy you can get Vengevine into play. Which like is by the way turn 3 you're trying to aim to do that, and sometimes you can do it turn 2. So it's also like, for instance, if you have like a Hedron Crab and a Supplier and 3 lands, and that's your mulligan to 5, then you don't want to play anything turn 1, and then turn 2 you can play Hedron Crab, mill 6, and then play Supplier. So that if you hit Vengevine in top 6, you get it into play. There's also another really cute trick that is if you have Hedron Crab in play and you play a fetch land, you want to play it first, mill yourself for free, and then if you hit Nakamura, you respond to the trigger by fetching and milling yourself 3 more, so that if you hit Priced Amalgam, you'll get it into play.
Right. It'll check.
But if you just go like play the land and fetch right away in response to the trigger, you will, and then like you hit Nakamura when it's up 3, it'll come into play, and then you get Amalgam later, and it won't have seen a creature.
Right.
Come into play from the graveyard. So yeah, that's something to be aware of. There's also like things where you can get to plan around milling over a Gravecrawler and or a Fate Stitcher. So that's why we see 1 Fate Stitcher in the deck. It's that's not really a popular choice. I think it might only be me playing it, but I really like it. Because what it does is that it's a zombie you can get into play from the graveyard, so that you can cast your Gravecrawlers.
Okay.
And then the Gravecrawlers will enable you to get Vengevine into play. So the thing about the thing about like getting Gravecrawlers in play, like you kind of need to rely on hitting Nakamura and Priced Amalgam to get a zombie in play from your graveyard, so that you can cast your Gravecrawlers unless you drew a zombie naturally. But with Fate Stitcher, like it doesn't really take very much. You only need 2 lands, because you can get the Fate Stitcher in play, untap your land, and then cast 2 Gravecrawlers.
Right.
But you can also use the Fate Stitcher to tap down a blocker, for instance, if that's what you need. Or there's like rare cases where you can get it in play, tap their land so they can't Cryptic Command, and then like set up and get your things into play, and that's like, yeah, it's there's a bunch of weird scenarios like that.
Good card, good tech. And yeah, like you said, it's easier to get these Gravecrawlers in play through Fate Stitcher than instead of relying on the giant combo of Narcomoeba into Prized Amalgam into the Gravecrawlers. So, are there any other important interactions you think people need to know about this archetype? We went through a lot of them, and it sounds like, a lot of these things aren't exactly intuitive for a lot of people, especially if they're coming from maybe even a Dredge background.
Yeah, for sure. This is not at all like playing Dredge. Very, very different. The biggest thing is that with Dredge, you usually have inevitability, like you're going to win if the game goes long. And that's not the case with this deck, because it will, at some point, just very easily run out of stuff to do, because like you only have so many cards in your library, you only have so many creatures. And you don't have the stuff like a Conflagrate that's just going to like scale and get better and better the later the game goes. You can't like build up with stuff like Loam. So you kind of, like you're really like living the high road life on like turns 1, 2, 3, and like maybe turn 4 you might do some stuff. But then like your draws can just be very terrible. You can just keep drawing like Creeping Chills and Nakamura's and Vengevines, and you're just very bad. One thing to note though is that Nakamura is not that bad to have in hand, because on turn 3 you can play that on a 1-drop and trigger Vengevine.
Right. You can still do that.
So that's usually when I have like usually have like Vengevine, Priced Amalgam, Nakamura in hand, and you can only put 2 on bottom, and then I choose to keep Nakamura most of the time.
Okay.
Like when you're against a 5.
That's good to know. What do you think is the most misplayed card in this deck?
The most misplayed card. Well, I mean, definitely like this Supplier would be one answer to that. There's also, you could probably talk about the Force of Negations in the sideboard, because they're kind of funky. Like we haven't seen a proactive graveyard deck like this get to play a Force of Will type card before. But this deck just happens to have enough blue cards where that card is actually playable. So, the things that this card is intended for is stuff like Karn, I guess both Karns, but mainly the 4-mana one, because that's a way that can like stop you by getting Bridge, or like Rest in Peace. Like you kind of trying to stop. It's actually like still a proactive card, even though it seems kind of reactive, because you're trying to stop their answers to what you're doing. So you board it in as like Rest in Peace and Karn and stuff like that. So you don't board it in as Ursa, for instance, even though like they have non-creature spells, because you're not gonna catch very many of the relevant ones on their turn.
Right.
But that's more like a, might be like used improperly, as in like it's not like boarded in the right places. Yeah, I'm not really sure if like any answer would fit other than Stitcher Supplier to that question.
It's probably a good answer anyway. You said that there's not a lot of room to be siding in too many cards. So, like, what in general, what's the most number of cards you're siding in and out?
Yeah, I would say 3 to 5 usually. I mean, I have done 7 before, but it's so painful. The Okos help a little bit because they can allow you to like win a game naturally. So one thing that's like really different from this deck compared to like the Hogaak versions was that in Hogaak it was very reasonable to just win. Like they play Leyline and you just like play creatures and beat them down.
Yeah.
Especially since it was easy to cast Vengevine. Like Vengevine is a big part of this because like just 4/3 haste for 4 mana. It's pretty good when the opponent like mulligans a 5 in search of this card that like doesn't give them a card back. And yet you have like a bunch of very reasonable creatures. But the issue here is that instead of having like a bunch of creatures that mill you, you have like some O2s and O4s and like some mill 10 spells, which you could combine if you draw a bunch of these effects to try and mill them out. That could come up. I haven't done it yet, but I've certainly tried a lot of times against the Leyline, where you just like sit and sandbag fetch lands and you just try and like have one big turn where you just play like Hedron Crab, fetch, and
let's do this.
So the issue is that like half your deck is that plan, and then the other half is like play Price Tamagon, play Vengevine, attack for 7. The plan. So yeah, the issue is that like your ways of beating a Leyline without having an answer is very mismatched. But Oko does help the beat down plan a lot because then you can turn your Hedron Crabs and your Merfolk Seeker Keepers into actual attackers. And also it serves as an answer to chalice and such.
Is 2 Oko the right number? Like, I mean, Oko might get banned. Who knows when?
Yeah, that's the thing. If Oko does get banned, maybe you should replace them with some Abrupt Decay type effects to answer chalices. Or like maybe play Unravel the Ether instead of some of the Nature's Claims. You could also... I did have 2 Leylines in my sideboard before I added the Okos. So that's also a card you could do.
But in terms of the number, 2 is the good number?
Yeah,
because just saying, like, Oko is so good... You know, people are pushing him to 4 in all the other decks.
Yeah, it's mostly just that if you add more Okos, you have to cut other cards, and your sideboard space is kind of tight already.
Okay.
Because you really want, your cards to be very high impact, and so, but I mean, also the issue is like if you have 4 Okos, then like you're gonna overboard unless that's the only card you bring in.
Right.
And it's not like this deck is not supportive enough of Oko that it can just win by itself necessarily. You kind of like need them to stumble or need them to have like, have to have mulligan to a graveyard hate piece, and then maybe the Oko is good enough to win by itself.
Right.
So that's why we're not all in on the card.
Gotcha. What are the main accomplishments of this particular list? You mentioned some results back in October. Has it won or top 8'd anything else other than that?
Yeah, it's basically this PDQ win by Andreas Ganz and the summit of the modern playoffs. It's also like has some GP top 16s that I've noticed. But really, it's like played so little, and there also like haven't really been many modern events that we just like haven't seen many results yet. Obviously, like the Hogaak list had like numerous results, but
we've sort of been in Pioneer season, I guess.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, I mean, you just like haven't really been playing much modern, and then like there's the thing where it doesn't really make much sense to not play Oko in this modern format right now. So we'll see if like any bans happen that like might change this, and maybe the meta game can move forward. I would expect this deck to be the sort of thing that like pops out and has a really good weekend like twice a year because it just happens to be the time where people aren't respecting graveyards enough.
Yeah.
Because I think this is definitely the best deck to punish if people don't respect graveyards. Like Dredge is like a deck that can. It has like some bad matchups against even people who don't have graveyard hate, whereas this deck is just like it doesn't really do that, but it's also much worse at fighting against it.
Right. Do you think I mean, there's a lot of cards on the hot seat right now between like Urza, Mox Opal, Oko, but I think Oko is the main number one. Do you think if Oko gets banned, this may help or hurt the deck in any way? Can you predict that?
So, yeah, it's kind of hard to say because if Oko gets banned, like the most played deck, which is like the Urza Oko decks, like that's a good matchup that then disappears. But on the other hand, like maybe the format becomes like a little bit more degenerate again, which is kind of good for this deck. It's really hard to say. honestly.
No, it's always hard to predict exactly what's going to float to the top, but
Yeah, it might also be that the Ursa deck start picking up the Thought the Foundry engine, which is gonna make it a worse matchup for sure. Because then, like, instead of relying on like cryptic command to buy a bunch of time, they now
blockers.
Yeah, well, just the infinite combo and just like kill you, and you can't really interact with them. Like that's the issue with this deck is that you have no interaction, and so if the opponent has like a fast combo, like stuff like Devoted Druid or it kind of Infect, depends on if they draw a Blighted Agent or not. Like those matchups can be kind of bad, because you don't have any interaction. And similar, if like the format moves to a way where it's like really fast and where it's really fast and has a bunch of things that you would need to interact with, that makes your deck a lot worse. However, if the format like is kind of slow and mid-rangey, but not like focused on the graveyard, like that's when this deck is like really close to shine, which is kind of where we are right now, but also not really, because like there are other decks that then randomly play Rest in Peace and stuff. So
that's right. So actually talking about, the old Wurza deck, which also used to have like main deck and Snaring Bridge, which they could like were of invention for. Is that something you're not looking forward to?
Yeah, that would also be a very big issue. And the thing though about Ensnaring Bridge is that you do need to have an empty hand, so it might be hard to get it down fast enough, especially since like even though it might lock out my Vengevines, my Amalgams can still attack, and even if my Amalgams are locked out, my Narcomoebas and Gravecore's can still attack. So I might still have like lethal through a bridge. I've certainly like had that a lot in the past where it didn't really matter. So yeah, it's not always that good. I've also like even against a card like Grafdigger's Cage, where they might play main deck, I've also beaten that because I just milled a bunch of Creeping Chills and then like played some 2/1s, and that was just good enough to win.
Yeah. So... the deck has a ton of explosive potential. How big of an edge do you think you get from mastering this sort of deck? Like, how much experience does this require?
So it's kind of unique. I think if you have played the Hogaak decks, it certainly like takes a little bit of the top off.
Okay.
Or like you might just be someone where this whole like combat centric like tight sequencing with creatures like is very natural to you because of the decks you played in the past, and like maybe it becomes a lot easier to pick up. So it's a little bit hard to say. I mean, I would definitely like not just pick it up for a tournament without having played it before, and I don't think like 2 Magic Online Leagues is enough. Because there are really a lot of things that you need to work on, especially since, as I said before, like you don't get bailed out from making mistakes with this deck. Like,
you need
one mistake can easily just cost you a lot. Because, as I said, the deck is like not that individually powerful, but if everything comes together right, it certainly is powerful. But you also need to like work to make that happen. So, yeah, I would definitely prefer like a couple weeks practice or something before an event with this deck. But the reward is that like if the whenever like the meta game is, I keep repeating this, but it's really important for like how good this deck is. Like whenever the meta game is not prepared for graveyards, that's when you can just crush people with this.
There's got to be something you have in your back pocket for when the moment is right. Or actually, that's a good question I have with this sort of deck. Do you want to have it in your back pocket, or do you prefer to just keep jamming it until the moment happens where people don't have graveyards? Because you can never know always when they don't have like the graveyard hate.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that's kind of like playing the lottery, but I think it's fine to do that. But I think you could definitely like have a higher win rate with another deck if you're just like choosing one to keep jamming with it. So I would prefer to have it in the back pocket. But it also depends a little bit, because if you're just like playing some IQs every weekend, or like most weekends, then it might be like, as you said, hard to tell when people are playing graveyard hate. And if you really enjoy this style of deck, like you can certainly win. I had like one of my friends very recently win an IQ with this deck, like just last weekend, after like chatting a little bit with me about the deck. So it's not like it's completely useless in any metagame that's not specifically what you need. It is like still very fast, and it's been quite impressive to me.
Yeah, it's very. It sort of reminds me of the classic affinity decks where if no one has great artifact hate, you're just gonna die to it. It's really fast, explosive, and then if they have the artifact hate, you die.
Honestly, I think having Affinity and NoGaak is like a great spot to be in, because they are kind of similar play patterns in that it's creature combo, like very like sequence based. even though like obviously the decks are like super different, but it's not like the you know mindset you need is like kind of similar for both of them, and and then like one of them is good in metagames where the other one is bad usually because of artifact hate and graveyard hate. It's not like the same thing. So like it wouldn't be like completely ridiculous to just have like these two decks be your decks and then I just switch between them depending on metagame.
Try to time the metagame in the right way. Well, that's really great. Do you have any other advice to people that are interested in picking up this deck? Like, what is this deck? Like, what kind of player is this deck for?
Well, it's definitely for the person who likes to do things a little bit differently, but yeah, likes to play short but intense rounds and likes to gamble a little bit.
Oh yeah.
I would say as a piece of advice is to definitely find Andreas Ganz's article on Hayuri. Maybe you can put a link in the description to that because that's really good for reading. It's obviously a little bit outdated since like new cards have come to the deck since.
So there's an article that you can read about this. We're going to have in the description below a nice primer on this deck.
Yeah, I will note actually that some of the changes I made to the deck, like adding Hogaak Angler over Carrion Feeder, like that's because of the prevalence of Eldrazi right now.
Okay.
Where Hogaak Angler is bigger than or the same size as the Eldrazi's, and it doesn't get countered by Chalice, which makes it a lot better.
Right.
In those spots. That's also where you can beat cards like Raftiga's Cage, just like have a 5/5 on turn 2. And then like there's also like people who play Once Upon a Time, which I think is very reasonable to play 1 to 2 copies of, like maybe in place of a land, maybe in place of something random. Because it's just like makes it a little bit easier for you to like find your hidden crabs or find the fetch lands that you need. But the issue with it is that like since if it's in your opening hand, you don't know if it's a payoff or not, so it's kind of hard to factor into your mulligans, which is the big reason not to play that card. So yeah, you can definitely like toy around a little bit with the list. You can change the sideboard numbers. There's also like I know Ganz was playing with a Dredge Splash in the sideboard for like Ancient Grudge and such. So it's also something you can do. But yeah.
Awesome, that was fantastic. All right, so if people want to go deeper with you about NoGaak, where can they reach you?
So I'm on Twitter at MrChecklistCard. That is Mr. Checklist Card. And you can also find me on Twitch, where I sometimes stream. It probably won't be NoGaak very often, but that is twitch.tv/redbuttontie.
And you're also one of the instructors on the MTG Mastermind.
Yeah.
So if you want to see gameplay and instruction about that, shout out to the MTG Mastermind. You can learn to level up your game from people like Simon Nielsen.
Yes, I'm also one of the coaches there. Where definitely so the friend I mentioned before, the IQ winner, like he's part of the mastermind, for instance, and has been chatting to me through that group. So that's probably like the best way you get to like get a bunch of in-depth knowledge about like this deck or any other deck I've been playing. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the show, Simon. We got some really good, insightful information about how to approach this deck. A lot of unintuitive interactions that people need to know, because it sounds like you need to squeeze out every little bit of value to maximize the impact, the explosive impact that this deck has. And you know what? If you're a gambler, you like this sort of aggressive milling aggro strategy, then NoGaak is going to be for you. So anyway, this has been Nikachu, Merfolk Master, with Simon Nielsen, Hogaak Master, talking about NoGaak in Modern.